Hi, it's Andrew and welcome to another edition of the Performance Intelligence Podcast, the podcast about all things human performance. Optimize performance through adapting your physical, psychological, and emotional state. Today I'm talking to Jay Stevens, a father of two with an extraordinary story of grit and determination. In 2018, Jay was living the dream, an accomplished athlete, thriving in his sales career, a loving husband and father. But in a split second, everything changed. A horrific helicopter crash in Uluru left Jay paralyzed, with doctors telling him he would never walk again. Jay suffered a severe spinal cord injury, and despite the overwhelming prognosis, he refused to accept his fate. He fought back, he dug deep, he rebuilt his body, and he remodeled his life. Jay Stevens has defied the impossible, becoming the first paraplegic to walk to Everest Base Camp without the aid of a wheelchair. His story isn't just about survival, it's about pushing through the barriers that life throws at you. And Jay openly talks about harnessing the gift of the dark side. Jay Stevens, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
It's a delight to have you in. We caught up about a month ago and we started talking about your story, your journey. I said, we've got to get you on the podcast. But before we went live today, we've got a couple of mutual friends. You threw me with that one.
Yes, we do. I think the old running group with Ken Green at Centennial Park. Obviously, I met up with an old friend, David Byrne, last week and said I was coming on this podcast today. And he, of course, said you were training in the group just before I came in. But, of course, the middle distance background is aligned very strong.
We probably didn't know me as my proper name. You probably knew me as Freddie. So one of my best mates is Shagger, who does have a real name, Simon Rentell. So he was in the squad when you were there. You would have had Nick Cope. David Evans probably had moved on as well. Roscoe was in the squad.
Yes.
Yeah, Roscoe. I can't believe he's a High Court judge.
Talking in the squad.
Would never shut up. So when was that? What year were you in the squad with Greeny?
So I came in the start of 2004. So this previous squad that I was in disbanded and I'd moved across with some other athletes from that previous squad to Ken Green, and I was there for about 3.5 years till midway through 2006.
I wrapped up in about 2000, so I was still based in Hobart. I'd come up here in my holidays. I'd stay with Kopi and Shagger. A lot of people just go Shagger, they go Shagger. Yeah, so I finished a few years before you, but great having that recall. Yeah. But that's actually thrown my script because I want to add that to it as well. Now with the podcast, Jay, you have what I call planned spontaneity, a rough framework, and then we add some of the stories that come out. So I'm going to pull on that thread because I now fully understand some of your recovery. You would have drawn back on that, those grueling, awful freaking 1K reps around the lake in Centennial Park. I'm sure you use some of that as resilience and drawback.
We certainly do, and the good old De Broid Hill on repeat.
So rough framework for today, mate. I would like everyone to have an understanding, where you were in the accident, the physical and psychological changes you had to make in training. When you spoke to me about the dark side, I really leant in towards that. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it. Michael Jordan opened up a little bit about it, but I really like how you talk about it, embrace it. But I want to find out more about the dark side. I want to talk about training for Everest, you crazy mofo. How on earth did you be the first person to get to base camp as a paraplegic? Does not make sense. And then I want to talk about the future because I know you're doing keynote speaking. I know you're doing coaching. It's an inspirational story. I want people listening to this to stop whatever they're doing because, Jay, we podcast, we multi-track. So they could be mowing the lawn, they could be washing the car, they might be commuting. Stop, book this guy, get him to your events, get him to coach you. So anything you want to add to the discussion today?
No, I think I can go fairly deep on each of those topics for you.
And before I get into that, it's a question I'm asking all my guests. How are you? Like, what's going on in your life?
Life is really good. I am 6.5 years post-accident and really starting to turn over a new chapter in life. I'm up walking again with the aid of braces and walking sticks, living an active life with my young family. I've got 2 boys that are 8 and 5 years old, and I'm moving into the public speaking space, knocking off as many adventure walks and endurance walks as I can, trying to carve out a new niche of a paraplegic ultra athlete.
Yeah, wow. Do you define your life now pre-accident and post-accident?
That's an interesting question. I think there's so many parts from pre-accident that I've had to tap into. So it's essentially an evolution. It's like I kind of front-loaded all the learning in the first part, pre-accident, but all the little lessons, the biomechanics, the mindset, the resilience, I've had to extract each thread of that out into so many different experiences that I've had to go through post-accident. So it's essentially, I believe, just an evolution, really. Front-end loading with all the information and then having to really pick and pull those individual parts out for each of the experiences that I've had to go through post-accident.
So many questions on that, but let's set the scene for everybody. This is from Media Report not long after. Jay was in Uluru for a work conference. The flight was a gift from his employer for being a top sales representative. The helicopter was a single-engine Robinson R44 that took off for a 15-minute scenic flight around Ayers Rock. The helicopter stalled 1 minute into the flight, up 150 metres in the air. The helicopter fell back down to earth, crashing into hard sand.
Certainly did.
When I say that, where do you go? Like, what do you think? What do you feel?
So I've done a lot of work around the crash, specifically the PTSD, so I can speak about it without any emotion and recall it in quite vivid detail now. It's part of my story, so there's no real big, strong emotions with it. It was essentially just another day now. I've done a lot of work around that, which has obviously led to a lot smoother experience post-accident as well after doing all that work.
A lot of people, Jay, have an accident. They lose a job, relationship changes, and that defines the rest of their life. Would it have been easy for you to then go, hey, my life has changed dramatically from the accident, and then have that hinge the rest of your life? After the accident, can you give us just a feeling of where were you, like what happened? Just go back to that moment.
So immediately after the accident, I obviously had to get flown out of Uluru down to Adelaide to get put back together. Obviously, I broke my spine at T12L1, just where your leg nerves start, and I'd broken my 7 fixed ribs on the left-hand side, I'd broken my sternum, and I'd broken my pelvis in 2 places as well. So obviously getting put back together down in Adelaide, I was then flown back up to Sydney. I was out at Royal North Shore Hospital for another month, and then I was shipped out to a spinal cord hospital at Ryde. So I had to live there for 7 months. And I was living there by myself. I just had a young family at the time.
How old were your kids at that stage?
So I'd had my first one. He was 18 months old at the time. So I was away from him for 7 months and also away from my wife. So very tough time. In a weird way, I probably compartmentalized it a little bit, because the spinal cord recovery, they generally say through evidence, you get the most recovery back in the first 9 to 18 months to 2 years. So if I was going to be out there all by myself for 7 months, I was going to just absolutely put in the work. So I essentially kind of hit pause on the grief and the processing. I just threw my mind and obviously my body into rehab and voraciously reading neuroplasticity, different ways of training, and I essentially pretty much just put my own training program together, and that's where I put all my eggs for the first 7 months.
It's fascinating, even as you say that. You didn't study neuroscience, you haven't studied psychology, exercise physiology. Was there a moment where it just clicked and you went, fuck, I've just got to absolutely channel my focus? 800-metre runner, you were silver medalist junior. You got a quick time, mate, 1:52 as a 17-year-old. For anyone who's got no idea what that is, it's bloody quick as a 17-year-old. So you had some experience on goal setting there. You obviously had some real experience and success on sales. Did you pull on that, or what happened? What was that moment where you just went, right, I'm not going to feel sorry for myself. I'm not going to get weighed down by the expectation. I'm going to put everything I can into recovering.
I think the biggest part for me from day, it was just the utter denial of what happened. There was no way I would ever accept being told that I'd never walk again. Like I said, front loading with the knowledge from being a track and field athlete when I was young, lots of drills, learning about human biomechanics. But my career actually worked in the medical device sales field. So I was working with orthopedic surgeons, neurosurgeons. Through doing that work and obviously knowing about neuroplasticity, the brain rewiring, especially suffering a spinal cord injury myself, I was voraciously reading. I'd essentially just cherry-picked the key pieces of information that I thought worked, because when you actually do get to a spinal cord hospital, their primary motive isn't really to get you to walk again, it's to get you to learn to live and adjust to your new life in the wheelchair.
Can you say that again? Because you told me this before and I was like, I never knew that. Can you just repeat that for everybody?
Primary motive of the spinal cord hospital that I was at, obviously being a public health facility, it's about obviously getting the patients in and moving them on to lead their lives. And the big thing for me, type A personality, I was there for 7 months and the clock was ticking. So I was there to walk. And one thing I found out fairly quickly was that they were there to teach me to live in a wheelchair, learning wheelchair skills, wheeling in, sitting on the edge of a bed to do some boxing. There was handlebars for walking. There was all these pieces of equipment that I could see that I'm like, I can use that, but they were never offered to me. So I ended up doing a lot of the training by myself. Once everyone had gone out of the gym was full all day. So I'd go into the gym once everyone had left and I'd pull out these pieces of equipment. And that was when I set up my own training program and really focusing on stimulating that spinal cord, of which we can discuss further on.
Did you have a mentor? Was there a doctor? Was there someone guiding you on that?
No, like I said, I was lucky enough to have been working in the field with neurosurgeons and obviously voraciously reading. One of the other areas that I did pull on, being a keen surfer, there's actually a trainer, his name's Nam Baldwin. And
yeah, I know Nam. No,
yes.
Nam Breathwork has
Yes.
been behind a bunch of Australia's leading athletes as well. Wanting to get Nam on the podcast, we've spoken about getting him on. So I didn't realise you worked with Nam.
I did one of his breathwork courses. Obviously, being a keen surfer, I'd gone and done his breathwork course. However, I did see the training that he'd do with Mick Fanning and I think Travis Boak, who played for, I think it was Port Adelaide. And a lot of that was neurological stimulation, lots of tennis ball work. He'd obviously get their VO2 max, he'd get their heart rate up really high, and then he'd try and get them problem solving at the same time. Obviously, myself...
Had you done this before the accident, the training with Nam?
I'd done the breath work.
Got it.
I hadn't done any of the neurological stuff. So I'd actually watched his videos, what he was doing with some of those athletes. A lot of Swiss ball work, a lot of work with the tennis balls. When I was at Ride, when I was setting up my own training programs, I'd actually get up into a standing frame so it locks your knees out. Obviously, I couldn't move or walk at the time, but once my knees were locked, I'd be locked in the standing frame, but I'd throw the tennis ball against the wall. So I was just trying to get any sort of stimulation down the spinal cord around balance, especially the motor cortex with the throwing of the balls. I'd be doing that for an hour every single day. It was exhausting work, but just essentially I was thinking of my spinal cord like it was on life support, and I was just trying to keep as much stimulation as I could.
I'm really curious, where does that come from? Like, were you the kid that never accepted the status quo while everyone was zigging? Were you zagging? Or was there something that happened after the accident where you just went, no, fuck it, I'm not going to go to a rehab, spinal cord rehab, and only learn to be in a wheelchair? Did it just happen after the accident? Is this, like, if you ask your family, were you that playful pain in the ass who always did everything differently, or is it something totally different?
I think it was from a young age. I was never naturally gifted at sport. And growing up, playing soccer, and my big thing was track and field, doing athletics from the ages of 6 years old and never winning anything till you're about 13, 14 years old, I would just always keep working and working and working. And I think through loss, and like I said, tapping into that dark side, some of those challenges and adversities that you'd face, that's what builds character. And I don't think I would have the personality that I do have right now, both personally and professionally, if I hadn't lost so much when I was young, because you learn to just keep working and you end up outworking your competition. And it was the exact same mindset that I took into this sort of training. There wasn't too many people that I could bounce and get ideas off. So it was a collection of all the information that I could find myself, and then I basically put it into my own training program, and there's been some pretty good results.
One of the worst things you can do with your kids is give them everything. So you've got two beautiful boys. It must have been so hard during that time. I've got a few questions on that. But you know this, if you give your kids everything, they become precocious, spoilt little assholes. And it's hard, right? Because when your little kids look at you and go, Mom, Dad, can I have this? And if you give it to them all the time, they don't learn patience. They don't learn the art of having to work hard for something. And when you were talking about that as a kid, I can't help but think of Angela Duckworth's research on grit. Have you dug into that much? Grit?
Certainly, yep.
So perseverance and passion. So you obviously had a lot of grit, a lot of hardiness as a kid. Now to become a junior silver medalist in the 800 metres, you've got to have some talent. So I think you're underrepresenting yourself a little bit, but you worked hard. So that started as a kid. Sales is a contact sport, right? You make the right amount of contact with people and you have the right process and engagement yourself. So there's a pattern here around not finding life easy, but still having some success and getting rewarded. So you obviously built that into your rehab. Where did you have reference points? Because, and I'm making this about me, if I was looking at something, if I've had an injury, I want the evidence. Where's the evidence on someone who's done this? Was there evidence on people who'd done that, who'd not accepted the status quo? Or were you just charting a whole new territory?
It was an interesting one. I think I was charting just a whole new territory because, like I said, there wasn't too many stories that I could look on. And I'm just trying to think what I was looking at. Because the big thing that obviously got me going, I don't know why, but it was after about 18 months when I was at home, I'd be watching ultra endurance athletes and I'd watch docos on them. And it wasn't necessarily for the walking. It was more how they were thinking about long-term training, long-term goals. It's funny just how it's worked through osmosis, obviously with walking now. But the things that I was watching was always around the mindset. I'm always just chasing those 1%ers. Like I said, I've never been the most naturally talented, but I knew I could always outwork someone. And I think that translated fairly well into professional life as well, especially in sales, when, of course, as many touch points as you can, as many sales calls and better service obviously relates to better relationships, which then rolls on to better sales.
So you do the reps and sets, you do the work, you get the results. Go back to the question on the kids. God, that must have been hard. And again, I can't ask this any other lens than being a father. To be away from your kids for 7 months with an 18-month-old, that must have been bloody tough.
Crushing. That was easily the hardest. Like I said, I think I compartmentalised that 6-month period. It was just heads down and just straight into rehabilitation. I think a lot of that, it's kind of come up now, 6 years on. I still do a little bit of work with the psych. Now it's the grief that's come out, having to go back home for the first time in a maxi taxi from Royal North Shore Hospital, pushing your wheelchair up into a maxi taxi and sitting in the back in a harness, and then getting dropped out at your house and then wheeling into your 2-story townhouse, which you can barely fit down the hallway, and then seeing your young 18-month-old son. And it was only recently, about 4 months ago, that I'd finally actually realised the enormity and the gravity of how serious the grief was around that. Because like I said, it had been blocked out because the first 4 years were all walking. That's probably some of the stuff that I'm actually working through right now. So
my next question was going to be that. Did you lock up emotions and was there a residual effect? And you answered that before I even asked. So you're very intuitive, you're very in touch. Your eyes glistened when you said that? Absolutely, yeah. That's if there's one thing that makes me cry, it's my kids. Because they're the reason why I do everything that I do. The greatest gift that I could have been given. Obviously, the motivation is just there every single day when you wake up for walking, for being a father, and for life in general. So, what have you done to us? We've got 2 great men waiting to into this podcast.
Just swallowed an apple in here, Andrew. Swallowing these apples.
It's like we've cut up onions. Mate, it's such a moving story, such a passionate story. And as I talk to you, you're articulate. You've worked your story out. But I know you're sugarcoating some of it as well. It would have been just horrific, mate. Like you've fallen 150 metres onto hard sand. Your family's away. You've been told you're not going to walk. Like you must have had some horrible dark moments, or were you just in total denial?
It's an interesting one. Like I said, at the start, I think it was compartmentalising it, and then it moved into denial. And I think it was probably about 9 months or about a year after. I'll always remember I was sitting at the dinner table, and the first thought, that the hardest thing, I think, with a lot of things which are pushing that beach ball down underwater, is the denial part. And the first part of acceptance was at the dinner table one night, and a thought came into my head, and it was like, what if that helicopter was any higher? And it was the first time that kind of opened the floodgate of acceptance. Obviously, as time progressed, a lot of that denial and that softens. And I think once that softens, it opens up more pathways of acceptance, and it allows you more energy to transfer into other areas because it's just locked up in pain and emotion. And once I was able to finally let that go and move into a bit more acceptance, I was able to really drive down that rehabilitation path as well.
One other question, I wanted to ask permission. So the crash, how many other people were in the helicopter?
So there was 4 in the helicopter. There was the pilot and there was 3 passengers. So I was sitting behind the pilot and the other 2 passengers were on the left-hand side, front seat and back seat next to me.
And where are they? What happened to them?
Yeah, so the helicopter, the right-hand side took the brunt of the impact, and that was the pilot and my side. So we obviously got the most serious injuries, spinal cord injuries, and obviously a lot of broken bones. Luckily, the guy who was sitting next to me, who is now one of my good friends, Ben, he had a concussion. So he was able to pull us out of the wreckage because there was, I don't know what sort of fluids were dripping on us, but it probably starts with F and ends in L, and it was pretty close to going up. So he was able to luckily get us out of the wreckage. And the lady in front, Deb, I think she had a compression fracture in a vertebrae, but she did real damage to her heel, calcaneus. She broke that. And so, yeah, I think she had a few broken bones as well. But yeah, the right-hand side took the brunt of it. But luckily, with Ben coming to after having a concussion, he was able to pull us out and get us actually out of the helicopter.
Yeah, and you're mates with Ben now?
Yeah, we're mates now. So he's a great guy and interesting circumstances to meet. But I remember he said to me he was so scared to go back into the helicopter because he didn't know if it would continue rolling down. But he just said he just bit the bullet and got in, grabbed me and pulled me out because obviously my seatbelt had snapped, so I got thrown around the cabin. So I think I was on top of him when obviously it's rested on its side. So I think he's managed to kind of get himself out from under me. And then, yeah, he said he was worried it was going to fall down on him if it was going to come, but he still came in and got me. So
what a great guy.
Yeah. Absolute legend.
And where's the pilot at in his rehab?
So I think he had very similar injuries to myself. I don't think he's up and walking. I know he's been on TV on like a current affair and stuff like that. I think he does neurophysics. I think it's another different training modality, which is obviously another one that I've also done as well, which I kind of incorporated. But I don't think he's up walking as yet. Do
little things that other people get annoyed by, do you look at that now and just go, come on, champ, like honestly, is that your biggest problem? Or do the little things rock you more than the big things? Where do you sit on that continuum?
No, definitely the first part. The small things are just over my head now. You always got a frame of reference of your lowest points. I can remember like falling out of my wheelchair nearly on the main road on the northern beaches, all the cars watching and having to crawl back up into my wheelchair. My wife was next to me at the time. And even just little things, I think when you were staying at Ryde Hospital, you got little weekend trips away for a couple of hours. So I get in the maxi taxi and I was down at DY Beach and I was rolling down and I was just trying to get up to the disabled toilets and there was sand in the gutter and I couldn't even get up the gutter. So you just remember these little moments like that, and you always remember sometimes at your lowest points because there's always firsts. I think that was the biggest thing. There were so many new first experiences to have when you are living in a wheelchair, and you always remember them because they hold a fair bit of voltage. So yeah, certainly the small things I don't sweat as much these days.
So with kids, your kids were young, so they would just know you as Dad, and Dad the rock star now who climbs mountains and does all these treks we're going to talk about. You're making me feel lazy with that 50-kilometre trek coming up. I actually had to look at myself and thought, fire up, champ, good to go do something. But you'd been with your wife for how long? So
we met in 2012 on Anzac Day. So we've been together for 12 years now and married for 10.
It must have been challenging for your wife as well, going through the accident and the rehab.
Yeah, very difficult. She's a nurse. So she kind of got a little bit of disjointed information about obviously the accident. She just thought that I had a broken pelvis. There was, I think the triage protocol was probably a little bit left to be desired with the Royal Flying Doctor because everything, I was always saying my back, it's my back, it's my back. And they thought I just had a broken pelvis. Of course, once I finally got down to Adelaide, I actually, instead of being flown straight to Adelaide for emergency surgery, I got flown to Alice Springs and they tried to put me in a CT because they thought I had a broken pelvis. And it wasn't. After trying to get put in the machine 3 or 4 times, in and out, I started screaming and I was saying, guys, it's far more serious, it's my back. Finally, when I got down to Adelaide, they actually realised I'd burst my T12 vertebrae, of course, into the spinal cord, and that was when I was on the table the next day. So, yeah, it took the long way to get down to Adelaide Hospital, get put back together.
But you smile when I talk about your wife. There's a big smile comes on your face.
Yeah, no, she's been great. She's a soldier, and like I said, I'm not the easiest person to be around, type A personality. I'm very driven, and like I said, the first few years, I absolutely compartmentalised a lot of the grief, and a lot of the journey was just so focused on walking again, because I think the hardest thing was making wedding vows, sickness and in health, and then all of a sudden, 3 years later, you're a paralysed husband, you're a paralysed father. Obviously, my biggest motivation was to get up and to obviously be the best father I could be. And for me personally, at that time, it was walking. So type A personality certainly comes with its trade-offs as well. So
we'll come to the emotions and the feeling side. You're early 40s now, is that right?
39.
39, close. So you were on the cusp, whereas my generation, I'm 50, we were taught leave your shoes and your feelings at the door, young fella, and harden the fuck up. Whereas you were in that little bit of the transition, but were you more from the tough side rather than the emotional, have a cuddle type side?
Yeah, tough side. Both parents from NZ and Dad being part Maori. It was nice and simple, the old upbringing. But it was toughen up.
Are you a Kiwi, bro? I didn't pick that.
Yeah, Kiwi background. Like I said, that was a gift as well, especially going through the journey and building the grit and determination. That was all learnt through childhood experiences, for better and worse. And I think that served me enormously as well.
So tough upbringing, tough discipline, is that what you meant?
Yes, yeah, tough discipline. Yeah, boundaries set firm and very firm by the old man. You weren't stepping out of line very often, we'll put it that way.
There's so many more questions I want to ask, but let's go back to one of the therapies you used. And I first read about this about 5 years ago, and I thought it was a total crock of shit. EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I saw an article, it was in New Scientist, and they were talking about EMDR and some of the research behind it. I thought, really? And then I had a client I was working with, a female executive who'd had a lot of trauma, and she was doing EMDR and got phenomenal results. So I'll just position what it is for our audience. It's a psychotherapy treatment designed to alleviate the distress associated with traumatic memories. I've read that you identified with trauma memories just before the impact of the helicopter and lying on the ground after that.
Yes, so obviously the EMDR has been game-changing. And the reason why I went down that path, I actually had a friend who worked with a psychologist. And one of the biggest things that I was cognizant of was the PTSD. I never wanted the accident, which was only happened to me, I never wanted that to seep through into my children and down, of course, to my wife. So that's why I went down that modality. And yeah, very, very interesting. Like I said, such a rudimentary process, obviously moving the fingers in front of the eyes.
Yeah, can you just explain for everyone who's got no idea, talk us through the process of EMDR?
Yeah, so he'd get you to anchor into a memory of what you could remember from that afternoon. So at first I could remember being in the helicopter and then it shaking, but that was all I could remember. And a traumatic memory, you've got a quick feeling and a quick picture. That's all you've got. You don't have a story and you can't obviously discuss the memory in detail. So as the weeks went on, he's actually got his fingers in front of your eyes and you have to follow his fingers from side to side. And I believe it mimics the same processes that your eyes do when you're sleeping, when you see people's eyes fluttering in REM sleep. And as the weeks went on, I'd first anchor in that memory of being in the helicopter and I'd follow his fingers left to right, laterally. More and more would start to reveal itself. I could remember the helicopter starting to shake more and more. I could remember the noises. And there was even some points where my fists were starting to ball up really tight. And I was sitting behind the pilot on the right-hand side. So I was looking out the right-hand side window. And there was even a point in some of the therapy where my whole neck would lock up to the right-hand side. Just obviously it's all stored in your brain. Your brain's still, it's all in there.
But because of that trauma, your brain has just wiped
out.
it.
Yes. Yeah. So being able to peel the layers back essentially of the onion week in, week out, I was able to go back in and I could pretty much remember the whole crash going down and then also remember laying in the dirt afterwards. I think the greatest thing about it was it's like you're reinserting yourself. The Jay of today of 2024 is talking to the Jay of 2018 that's laying on the ground, saying, number one, you're safe. Number two, you're back up walking again. And number three, obviously, you've got a big 6 years ahead of you of rehab, but you're essentially coaching yourself through obviously a traumatic experience, but with the you of today. That's obviously the way that I interpreted it. And yeah, it has been a game changer for the PTSD for myself and the growth on the back end of the accident.
When you're in a conversation, in coaching psychology, we talk about in the conversation on the dance floor and above the conversation on the balcony. As you were doing that, I shifted to on the balcony, looking down at our conversation. Do you realise what you did then? You're talking about the Jay of the time. So you're disconnecting from the emotion and you're talking about it in past tense. You welled up and had a burst of emotion and expression when you're talking about your kids. And you had a flutter when you talk about your wife as well. So if she listens to this as well, yes, he did really show some emotion when he listened to you as well. But you then just talked about the accident. It was fascinating to watch. A traumatic accident. The chances of you surviving that are very low. It was really interesting seeing that. How long did that take to be able to do that, to disconnect from the emotion from the time and talk about it in past tense, shifting from it?
Yeah, so I think it took about maybe 3.5 to 4 years. Even I stopped it for about maybe 9 months at the end of 2023, from about March 2023 till December. I actually started back up again this year because there was some little residual effects of the PTSD that I'd still felt. Being able to just go back in, it's kind of like fine tuning. Sometimes there's always these little blind spots that can pop up and just little different parts. Sometimes when you're driving, confined spaces, driving through the Sydney Harbour Tunnel, being little triggers like that, confined spaces where you can't get out of. Obviously being in the helicopter, falling out of the sky, confined space, can't get out. So there's little triggers which still kind of pop themselves up every now and then. And being able to go in and still do the work on them and just obviously iron out the creases has been game-changing. Like I said, there's still little residual parts that are in there, but to be able to know there's a modality to go on and work in it, you believe in it, and of course you can see the results from it. And obviously I'm speaking about it in third person quite calmly, which means really processed.
That's what I really noticed. And with your keynotes and when you're doing the presentations, if you weren't there, it would be very emotional. It could be traumatic going to that period. So have you thought about that as well on your journey on rehab, that to get to the stage where you're right to talk about it?
Doing the EMDR has made my presentations 10 times better because you can speak about it in such detail and calmness. Of course, when you're speaking, you've got your pauses, tonality, and being able to go into it in such depth in a calm way, you can storytell it a lot better. And that's why it's been an absolute game changer doing the EMDR, especially moving into public speaking and being able to describe it in vivid detail, but in third person rather than being the person who's experiencing it.
Well, some of the research on this says a lot of our memory processing is done when you're in that REM, rapid eye movement sleep. So doctors mimic that state using the hands or fingers fluttering over the eyes. So you're really tapping into that.
Yep.
So that's some of the psychological training. Did you use imagery? What other modalities did you use?
EMDR was the main one that I was really focused on. The reason why I chose that is I didn't really want to go down the talk therapy part. I find sometimes that may reinforce things. That's my personal belief. And the EMDR was, essentially ripping the scab off, and I really wanted to get right into it. And of course, the driver for that was obviously my family. I didn't want anything to seep through onto them. It was my work to do. And I was ready to do it.
A big part you would have had to focus on as well is learning to move again. So I put my exercise physiologist hat on. When we start as a kid, you don't realise you're learning to walk. You wobble around to start with, and before you realise you're running, you're hopping. So look at Millie, my little 2.5-year-old, who keeps telling me I'm a big girl. I'm not a baby. She's a big girl, and she's starting to run and jump. So there's that normal automation, and we don't think about that. When you work in my previous role as a strength and conditioning coach or a track and field coach, you actually are training the nervous system to get faster. You had to go back and train your nervous system a totally different way. I'm really interested to know how that started. What did you do to learn to walk again?
I'd probably say there's 4 parts around that. So when I was at Ride, now I can't feel my left leg. I've got no sensory, so I don't know where it is in space and time. So when I did get to Ride, and once I found out the physio wasn't really physio there for me to walk, I'd get into the gym by myself. And as you said, you've got a 2-year-old. The first thing I did, all I had was my hip flexors. So I'd get the mats down on the floor. I've always been big on biomechanics, opposite arm, opposite leg. I'd have to start crawling. There's videos in my keynote of crawling on mats. And it was just to try and keep those biomechanical pathways going, opposite arm, opposite leg.
Arm, opposite leg. For uninitiated, when you did that, did you see what happened then? You lifted the chair.
Yeah.
That's sprint drill. So you've got that movement on the track, ears marked when you're doing your speed session.
Yep.
You're on the tartan, you're floating. You obviously went back to that.
Yes. Yeah, so it was a lot of that work. I was really big on visualisation. When I was at Royal North Shore Hospital, there was a bike that you could strap your feet into and it would turn your legs for you. So I knew it took me about 48 minutes to run around Narrabeen Lake, which is about 9 kilometres. Even when I was at Royal North Shore Hospital, I'd strap my legs into that machine then and I'd shut my eyes and I'd visualise going around Narrabeen Lake. And I remember when I opened my eyes, I think I was about 52 minutes and 50 seconds. So I was about 4 minutes off my normal pace.
You'd close your eyes the whole time.
I'd close my eyes and picture running back around Narrabeen Lake.
So could you freeze frame and go up the back of the lake? Like I've done that lake multiple times as well. So you've got along the highway, you've got around the academy, the Institute of Sport, you've got the back end. So could you actually see all the different parts?
See all the different parts, know all the curves, turns, know where the bridges are, know how many strides it actually takes you to go across the bridge. Obviously coming from a middle distance running background, I'm quite numerical. And
so I've got this is intriguing. Like this is not on my running sheet, mate. This is fascinating. Did you use visualization? Because if you look at imagery is multi-sensory. So it's not just your sight, it's feel, taste, smell as well, and also sensory information.
Yeah.
Would you do that when you ran? So are you very pattern-based? Would you run over a bridge and go, this is 8 steps? Or was that in your memory you didn't even realise?
Oh, I was always very numerical. Like I said, I didn't really always have that natural talent, but I knew if I'd focus on breathing, numbers, stride patterns, that was obviously the way that I'd be able to distract myself and keep everything quite systematic. And even when I used to run around Narrabeen Lake, you'd know your kilometre splits, you'd know how many steps you'd be taking over certain areas of the bridge. And I used to play games with myself, but they're always around systemising your running, just to distract you some days when, like I said, your mind can be focusing on how tired you are. But if you've got, like I said, that other distraction of systems and numbers, that was certainly something that I'd used throughout the rehab as well, because when I did get out of Ryde Hospital after the 7 months, so I took up long distance swimming. Number one, it got the cardio in, but also long distance swimming. When you're swimming 3Ks for about an hour and 20 minutes, it's the same biomechanics, opposite arm, opposite leg. When you're stroking with your right arm, you're kicking with your left leg. So I was always trying to keep those biomechanical pathways open. Even though I couldn't walk, I was either swimming, I was visualizing. So I was always, like, it was an obsession. It was an absolute obsession. But like I said, I'd had the front end learning from when I was younger, and I was pulling on all those different threads to essentially just keep the nervous system alive for when I was going to walk in the future.
So summarising, the front end learning was being good, not great. So having to really work to be an athlete. So you had that grit, that mongrel, coming from a tough family background. So you'd obviously had some discipline as well, and that taught you to follow command.
Yeah.
You are very systems oriented, much more than I realised. Surprised you didn't go into engineering or science or something like that.
I'm good with language, not with numbers, but when they're numbers in my head and they're related to something that I'm really focused on, i.e. athletics, i.e. running, like I said, you're engrossed, just absolutely engrossed in it.
I think a lot of people would have that background. Is there a superpower? Like you said, the kids, you said with your wife. What was it when you really just shut everything down? Because when we close our eyes, I had a session with the Manly boys this morning, and I often say, when close your eyes, because we're visual creatures and that cuts out all the distraction. I'm fascinated in you from a mental skill summary. The fact that you were on the bike, you didn't feel your left leg. I've got questions on that in a moment. And you could use imagery and visualization, so multi-sensory, to go around the lake, and you were within a couple of minutes. Fascinating.
Yeah, because you could strap your feet in too, you were able to use your arms too. So I just obviously just had my hands in that running position, and I just had my eyes closed. My legs were automatically turning with the bike. And then, of course, I just had my hands. Like I said, it was always keeping those biomechanics alive. I just never wanted to. It was a use it or lose it, and it really was. Because I remember the first time I went to swim again, because I can't feel my left leg, when I started stroking, I was just like, whoa, you'd lost it all because you can't feel your left leg. So it took me a little while to reprogram that. And that was why I always kept a long distance swimming with the same biomechanics and just always still thinking of those biomechanical pathways.
Can you tell me a bit more about your left leg? Because you've got good movement, and I heard about you and I knew about you. Didn't realise we had the running connection. But for a guy who's been diagnosed as a paraplegic to do Everest Base Camp, I think, oh God, this guy's done a phenomenal job to get his movement back, to get the nervous system going back, to reframe, to frame the brain. But you still don't feel the left leg?
Yeah, so I don't know where it is in space and time. So if I shut my eyes, and I wouldn't know where it's swinging. You know, when if you can shut your eyes, you know exactly where your leg is in space and time. I don't know where that is. So the tricky part for me is always generally trying to keep a visual on it. If I'm doing, say, Everest trek, I always had to have a visual on it. But I've set up different cues in my head now, biomechanical cues, to know that obviously when my opposite arm, when my right arm swings through, my left leg is also going to swing through. I've also got another little trick. I know if I push into the carbon foot plate on my left foot, you know you're going to get that little bit of spring to obviously initiate the stride pattern for my left leg to come through. So I've set up new cues, obviously opposite arm, opposite leg, and then also I can also just feel, subcutaneously I can't feel on the surface of the skin, but sometimes deep down in the muscles I've still got a little bit of sensation. So I can feel when my hip flexor extends and gets a little bit tight, you know it's going to swing through. So I've essentially had to rewire new cues and new pathways to obviously keep my walking, but to keep it economical. That's my biggest thing, middle distance runner here. I like to keep things economical. With the longer and longer that my walks get, I don't want to be using brain power to be looking down at my leg this whole time. So that's why I've been looking at adding in these cues.
Exercise physiologist coming in again. So if you look at your hips, if your psoas major or your iliopsoas is tight, it brings the hips forward.
Yes.
To counterbalance that, you've got to stretch out the iliopsoas, and you've got to also strengthen your glutes and release your iliotibial bands, your ITBs. What's your glute strength like?
That's the tricky part. So my glutes are weak, but my hip flexors are strong. And when I am looking to extend and stand tall when I'm walking, I don't have the neurological coordination to isolate each one of those muscles. So sometimes they both co-contract. So my glutes are contracting at the same time as my hip flexors.
So that's going to cause you to be rigid.
Yes. So that's why it's...
God, you're fascinating.
So it gets really, really tight. So the amount of... It's like you've got the worst lactic acid in your hip flexors.
Can I just explain that for everyone? Because we've got agonist, antagonist as muscles. So when one muscle works, the other one generally relaxes. Think about your quads and your hamstrings, because if they both tighten up together, like you are in a cramp, your body just freezes. So you've got this natural rhythm between agonist, antagonist, or between contracting and flexing. It's just the way the body works. But when you are contracting your hip flexors and your glutes at the same time, it's just like basically, if you think of soldier legs, like if someone's lying on the bed with soldier legs and you contract everything, that's what that's like.
It's like they're in a cast a little bit. It's like they're in an invisible cast. So if I'm trying to get upstairs, I don't have the coordination to release my quad and clench my hamstring to bring my leg up. I have to swing, everything clenches at once, so my leg's straight, and I have to swing it out wide. So it's quite a painful experience walking, especially for longer and longer distances, because my hip flexors are stronger, so they end up taking over and you start hunching further and further over as the walk gets on. So it's an interesting, the first 6 months...
Biomechanically, it's fascinating.
Yeah, the first 6 months of learning to walk again was probably the... Physically and pain-wise, that was probably the hardest, because I'd been sitting in a wheelchair for 4 years. Number one, my hip flexors were so short and tight. It was like someone told you to drive around Australia and not get out of the car, and then you've got to get up and walk. Just how tight they were. But I also had weak glutes at the same time, so I was quite hunched, and the muscles were opposing each other. So the first 6 months, obviously I could only walk for 15 metres at a time. I'd have to turn around and sit in my walking frame. So I'd only walk 200 metres in total, but every 15 metres I'd have to stop for a couple of minutes, reverse and sit in the walking frame, and then once I'd have enough strength, I'd get up and do it again, and then I'd be out for about 4 or 5 days. That 200 metres of walking would obviously, it was like I was hit by a truck. and it took me about 4 or 5 days to recover. So
now there's one of the many open loops, and I've got to do a double check. I'm just getting engrossed in you as a human specimen. I love your psychology. I love the growth you've had, Jay, where you can actually talk about it. It's next level of mental skills. You're fascinating. There's a couple of groups I work with I want to introduce you to. I'll talk to you about that offline. Yeah. I got you in mind to come and help me with some of the programs we're doing. Don't listen to Shiny Head Bang On. Get you up there, because it's just a beautiful story of resilience and coming back, and we're still going to get to the emotions as well. But I spoke about the resilience. You're good, not great. Tough, disciplined life. Not wanting to be told you destiny. But what else did you tap into? Because I think that's easy. Sort of, yeah. What else? What really just went bang? Was there a superpower or something that you tapped into that just you didn't even realise?
Fatherhood, I think, was probably the biggest piece. I got on very easily through using that dark side energy and using that underdog mentality. But I think the missing piece, which obviously rounded things out, was probably the fatherhood piece. I think the fatherhood piece kept me consistent, whereas I was probably a little bit patchy. Obviously, when I was on, but when I could fall off the wagon. So I think the missing piece for the consistency to show up day after day was fatherhood. Obviously, a lot more purpose.
There's a reason I asked you that question, not just jumping to the dark side, because I wanted to know if there was something else. So I'm glad that we spoke about that, not just assuming. What does fatherhood mean to you? Because we talk about being a dad, and at time of recording, it was Father's Day on the weekend. But what does that really mean to you, fatherhood?
I think mentorship obviously was a pretty interesting situation I'd found myself in, and the only person that my two boys have to have an example in this world is obviously myself. So it's my duty. It's a duty to obviously show them that you're going to have ups and downs, but of course it's always the way you process it and the way you grow from it. And like I said, consistency is key. And like I said, is it Elliot Kipchoge said it, what he said, the only free ones are the disciplined ones. And like I said, I wouldn't say I'd put my hand up and say I probably wasn't the most disciplined pre-accident, but I certainly am now on the back end of it. And obviously it's absolutely enriched my life, both physically but also more emotionally, and the relationships that I have with my kids. You like words. You said you're good at words. So mentor, the derivative of the Latin word mentore, which means to be like. Is that what it is for you? You want your two boys to look up and be the role model to them, to show them about resilience, to show them that no matter what life serves up, you hold yourself high, you keep moving forward. Is that what it means to you, mentorship? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's always going to be curveballs. Like I said, when things are going good, that's nice. But I can guarantee there's probably more things that are going to go wrong. And it's always how you process it, how you come back from it, and how you grow from it. So, yeah, I think that's the key message that I really like to show them. Lots of physical recovery, lots of psychological recovery, lots of emotional recovery and mental skills. But you talk about the dark side. I'm going to go to a quote from Relentless by Tim Grover, the legendary coach who trained Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. Grover describes the dark side as a powerful, often hidden part of ourselves that fuels our drive to succeed. It's a part of us that embraces pain, thrives on challenge, and finds strength in adversity. Grover believes that everyone has a dark side, and it is a source of immense power when channeled correctly. He says, everyone's gift is their dark side. Everyone has one. It fuels you. It says you're going to win, and only you can control it. For some, the dark side might manifest as an intense focus, a relentless work ethic, or an unyielding desire to overcome obstacles. Perfect. The last sentence, unyielding desire to overcome obstacles. And I think that was forged when I was young. Like I said, I think I learnt most of my lessons in life through sport, and losing a lot when I was young is when I learnt the best ones about building character. And I think that obviously formed in later life in sport, but also I think that really served me well professionally as well. Obviously moving into a medical device community, I was thrown in the deep end with surgeons, and of course there was a bit of insecurity around that. There's a bit of imposter syndrome working in that field, coming in pretty green and fresh. But by losing when you were younger, I always knew I could outwork my competition. And the way I was able to do that was, if I didn't have the knowledge on the front end, I'd be able to bring that in through service, keeping all your accounts happy, X amount of phone calls. So I was able to use that in a professional sense. And of course, I was able to really tap into that in my recovery journey as well. I don't like being told that I'm never going to walk again by people who don't know who I am. They don't know what I'm about, and they don't know how I think, because I've certainly learnt that living with a spinal cord injury is problem solving, and certainly recovering from one, I had to really think outside the box with a lot of my training. And when someone and some other allied health professionals, you can see in their eyes, they ask you what your goal is when you come in. Obviously, I had a really serious injury. I actually didn't look at how serious my spinal cord injury was because I didn't want to know.
Consciously, you blocked it out?
Yeah, so I didn't look at my post-op notes for about 5 years because I just didn't want to know the severity of how bad my break was. And it wasn't until the start of last year that I looked. I'd crushed about 75-80% of the spinal cord. Obviously, the vertebrae displaced 80% into the spinal cord, and I didn't want to know that. So all I asked the surgeon at the start, I said, was it complete or incomplete? Obviously, complete being a spinal cord being fully severed. So all I knew was that I had an incomplete injury. That's all I asked. I said, that's all I want to know. So in my mind, that was just possibility. So I didn't have any other negative thoughts floating around through my head. And every single time that I'd encounter, obviously people saying that you wouldn't walk again and some difficult areas, I was always going to walk. And lucky I'm true to my word. So
there's a juxtaposition circling for me. There is the absolute drive and grit and fuel to keep moving forward and not look at the notes, to not lie down and not get up, literally. And tapping into some areas that other people don't go. Because looking at the dark side for a lot of people, I'm sure you get this in some of your corporate groups, it's uncomfortable for some people to go back. There could be trauma, capital T or little t. So for a lot of people, pulling on that thread, they don't feel safe, they feel threatened, and they don't want to go there. So can we go there with you?
Yeah.
On that? Because everything you've told me, I'm just going, yes, 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 yes. But there's that deeper power. Fatherhood, got it. But when you first said to me when we met 5 weeks ago about the dark side, I leant forward and went, oh, do you talk about this? And you went, absolutely. It's taken me a while to get comfortable to talk about it. I saw a YouTube clip when you first explained this, and you're all over the place a bit. Like you couldn't really put your finger on it. So can I put you on the spot now?
Go for it.
What is the dark side to you?
It's an animalistic instinct I have inside that I can't switch off. And when it comes to something I'm interested in and something that's got passion and meaning to me, which is walking, which is fatherhood, I just can't turn it off. I absolutely cannot turn it off. It's an obsession. I think from some of the discourse we've had here today, I think you can see how deep I've gone in to the rehabilitation and the way I've been thinking about those problems. And that's all come from someone saying you won't walk again. And I'm just like, I'll show you.
So there's an animal instinct inside you and someone says you can't do this and you're like, fuck you?
Absolutely. It's a big F you to them.
Okay. You mentioned before as well, and you had a bit of a smile, but you said your dad, tough. I've read here that you were raised in a sometimes violent home, physically and mentally, and you've been quoted as saying rage and anger in you wasn't a productive vessel until you used it in sport.
Yep.
Is that also the dark side, tapping into that?
Yes, absolutely. That's what keeps you going when nothing else will. Like I said, the motivation, it fades. And what are you going to tap into when that fades? And I've always found that to be an endless source of power. And when I am walking on long walks and that now, I always can drill back into some of those memories, and there's immense strength there. That's what gets you up out of bed when you're not motivated, when you haven't slept for 2 or 3 days with nerve pain. That's what gets you still going to the gym and chasing after those goals. It's that primal instinct.
So it's that animal inside you that just wants to be free, but is it also tapping into, because I read some of what you said about this and I couldn't quite understand, but when you go back to some of that violence, there'll be a lot of people listening to this who have similar experiences as well. I don't know many people who flip that and have actually used that to channel into that pain to channel into some of that fear and fuel them. So I'm just really curious, how have you done that so we can help some of our listeners? So when you think about that sometimes violent upbringing, how does that help you channel into the current day or the current moment?
I think one of the main things that I did do was, when I was young, I was always out of the house, and it was to stay away from the house, and it was always running. And so it was always beating myself into the ground. So just being exposed to that when I was younger, I was able to take out that energy when I was, I'd run myself into the ground every afternoon after school, if it was at the running track or if it was doing a 40-minute tempo run. And like I said, you're a creature of habit. So when I am doing the training now, it's almost like it's second nature. I've got a close friend who we message each other at 4:30 in the morning, and we're saying, have you trained today yet? Have you trained? Have you won today yet? And it's, like I said, it's just that. It's something that you've grown up with, and you still need to let it out, because it can come out in other unproductive ways. It could be, drugs, drink. I don't do anything, but I certainly do my exercise, and that's where I get to let it out, and it's therapeutic.
That was one of the open loops I wanted to come back to as well, because you said the beach ball analogy, which I love. You had to push it down to focus on rehab. You couldn't read the reports, the surgeon's reports. You couldn't focus on what was wrong because you just needed to keep moving forward. And 4.5 years later, you got up out of that wheelchair, which must have been a freaking phenomenal moment, even though your glutes and your hip flexors were locked up and you had a bit of a smile when you said that before as well. But tapping into that has obviously given you a power. It's given you this growth. I'm sure you've had a lot of people ask you this question. How would you guide someone else to tap into that without being overwhelmed by it?
I think I'd read something that was similar. It was about, obviously, Tim Grover and the dark side, and was, digging back in through your memory bank. What are some experiences that you've gone through, challenges, adversity, interactions with some other people, and, it's hovering your hand over one of those memories. What's the one that's like lava hot? What's the one that's got voltage in it? What's one that can really get the hairs on the back of your neck pricked right up? And, it's that feeling. That's the one. If you can tap into...
What is it for you? What's the lava hot one?
It's been a bit of grief lately. So after I'd had my accident, I'd drive down to Sutherland 3 times a week for acupuncture. I'd found a 90-year-old acupuncturist from China, and he had a specific way of doing spinal cord.
So you live Northern Beaches.
Yes.
That's what they call God's country. You drive a good hour to Sutherland 3 times a week for a 90-year-old Chinese Your story just gets richer and richer the more we talk.
Oh, like I said, it was an obsession. As soon as I got home after 7 months, the day I got home was the 23rd of June, which is my birthday. I would start driving down there. So I'd wake up at 4:30 in the morning. Obviously, I'd had to get changed and get into a wheelchair and push out to my car, take the wheelchair apart, put it in my car. Obviously, all these new things. I'd drive down there. I'd get down there by 6. I'd finish by 7, but sometimes it'd take me 3 hours to drive home because of peak hour. 3 times a week, 4 hours a day, just to go down to acupuncture. I'll easily call him a human sewing machine. The amount of work that he did with those needles, it was unlike any other acupuncture that's out there. He'd have the webbings of my toes pulled apart, and the needles are going in like a sewing machine in those dermal pathways. The craziest thing is that I could feel that, but I couldn't move my legs, so I could feel all the pain, all the dermal pathways, of course, firing back up.
You're trying to breathe through this and stay relaxed.
Breathe, I was sweating through it.
As soon as you contract, it hurts a hell of a lot more, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd go down there 3 times a week. Obviously, it was in the freezing cold. It was the middle of winter. And I even had needles downstairs as well, because I had no bladder for about 9 months. And he'd go downstairs, exactly where.
In case anyone's not in our vintage, downstairs you're talking about your genital area?
Yes. Yeah, he'd be there with the needles like a sewing machine, just poking the area, going in around. And
some people pay a lot of money for that in clubs.
Yeah. But after 9 months, I got my bladder back.
Really?
My bladder came back after 9 months. And like I said, so
you had acupuncture on your balls for 9 months?
Yep.
How did you even know to do that, explore that?
Like I said, it was just, I was voraciously reading. I was thinking outside the box because...
Where were you reading though? Because this is not stuff you're reading in the Daily Telegraph or the Sydney Morning Herald. Where were you finding all this?
So, of course, I was doing my own reading when I was at the hospital, but there was actually another patient who was in the spinal cord hospital with me. We'd had discussions, and then he'd obviously found this doctor down at Sutherland. His name's Dr. David Ty. And so we got out of ride at the same time, and so we all both started going down to see him 3 times a week. And like I said, just night and day difference. Like no one else was doing this kind of stuff. So I was always thinking outside the box. Like I said, there was nothing that was going to get you that nervous system recovery, like dermal pathways in between your toes, like down around your old fella. And where I had the hardware in my back, I had a 4-level fusion. So I had 8 screws on both sides of the vertebrae, and from T11, T12, L1, L2, and I had the rods. After a year, I actually asked for them to be taken out because my goal was walking, and I didn't want to be walking around with sort of stiff hardware in my back like that. So after 12, 15 months, I actually got all that taken out. I had to certainly ring around to find, because no surgeons want to do that surgery to take all the hardware out. Obviously, it's risky. There's no money in it because they're not putting anything in either. But obviously, once I got that taken out, that then gave Dr. Ty, the acupuncturist, access to that area to free up all that scar tissue as well. So he was able to get into those areas with those needles and essentially just break it all up and get more blood flow around to those areas as well. So there was always a method to the madness, and I'm just really glad that it's worked out.
It's awesome. So last question on grief before we go to base camp. How are you working on that now? And the reason I ask is, to perform at a high level, I often get a young male or a young female will come and see me, Jay, and go, I want to represent Australia. I want to go to the next Olympics, or I want to be world class. It could be a performer of any type. And I had this recently, and then this person said, but I also want to have a really good work-life balance. And I just laughed. I said, it's not going to happen. Well, what do you mean? I said, if you want to be world-class, you've got to be really unbalanced. But let's make sure you're not unbalanced so much that when you come out of your high-performance phase, that you're unhinged and disconnected, and you've got a total collateral damage on your hands, every alley, relationship alley, physically, emotionally, spiritually. So for you to focus on that, there was an imbalance. You were one of the most high performance rehab I've heard. It's mind blowing. Who else drives 4-hour round trip to go see a 90-year-old Chinese bloke to stick pins in their balls? If that's not a highlight from this wizard in the promotion, nothing's going to be. But with that, there obviously was some trade-off.
Absolutely.
And you're working on that.
Yeah. So you definitely, like I said, it was compartmentalized. Everything was about walking, mobility, and just working to try and build back that former life that you had. And of course, the trade-off with that, I was doing the EMDR work around the crash and the PTSD, but I dare say the grief was that beach ball that was being pushed underwater. And at the start of this year, I was on some opioids for 5.5, 6 years. I was on them for a long time for my nerve pain. I still have shocking nerve pain.
Which is really common for people who've had spinal injuries.
Yeah.
It's one of the most common causes of treatment, is my understanding in the research.
Yes. And it took away the pain. It was really, really good for that. But of course, you develop a dependence, and that dependence increases. And at the start of this year, I obviously realised that it's not productive anymore. And so obviously I had a withdrawal period from them of about 6 weeks, horrific. And I realised... So
what are the symptoms coming off opioids?
Cold sweats, panic attacks, a bit of anxiety. And for a fairly relaxed person and in control, to have, like I said, part of your mind, which is just playing up a little bit, to not have that level of control, it was very, very, it was troubling. It was difficult. But like I said, fatherhood, that was obviously your North Star. So, of course, I knew what my goal was, and it was difficult, but ended up coming through it. And one of the big things that I did find out on the other end of that was there was a few little bits of the PTSD that was still popping up, something I probably couldn't have worked with before because you're a little bit out of it. You're slightly doped out a little bit when you do have that sort of medication. So it's like you're operating in a 3 to a 6. You can't go higher and you can't go lower.
Gotcha. So it helps you normalise.
Yeah.
So you don't feel as much joy, as much pleasure, but you definitely don't feel
you don't feel low. So it's like you're just hovering around a neutral. Couldn't go high, couldn't go low. And I certainly found coming off them, there was some little blind spots around the PTSD and the crash that had come up. And it was through working with that I'd actually found that's where the grief opened up. The grief was the main one that I'd pushed down. Going back home to see your kids for the first time in a wheelchair, falling out of the wheelchair in front of your children, that was probably been the biggest one that I've really had to work. That's the one I pushed down the most. It's been really good to work through that because I find, number one, it's a tight energy that's softened up now, but also when I'm speaking now, you can explain some of the feelings in a lot more depth because you can, like I said, I can resonate with it in third person now. I can story tell with it rather than it having me locked up and knotted up in the chest.
The story. Yeah,
yes.
Gotcha. Because that would have been scary to get up on stage and to be recalling the accident, the rehab, and then going to that emotion, to that trauma. Have you had, or do you foresee the opportunity where you sit down and have this chat with your dad about where you're at, what you've learnt? I'm very curious.
So he actually did the Everest trek with me. So he came on the trek with me. He actually called me up about 5 months before and he's like, oh.
Look at you smiling now. This is moving me again.
Warmth, yeah. So he actually said, oh, son, I might want to come on the show. I was like, oh, geez, righto. So he actually came on the trip and I think he was MVP of the trip. He's 68, 69 and he didn't look a beat off step. He was awesome on that trip. A really great bonding experience. Like I said, if there's one thing he did teach me, it was he obviously came over from Australia with nothing and you do what you have to do for your family no matter how you feel and you just got to get it done. And if there's one thing that I did learn from him, it's that mindset, and I think that's where that work ethic and that bit of that dark side has come from. And, of course, doing that trek over there with him to Everest, that was really special to, like I said, you're meant to be in a wheelchair for the rest of your life and all of a sudden 6 years later you're standing at the base of Mount Everest with your father, who was there from day one. So, yeah, magical time. And, yeah, like I said, relationships really, really deepen and strengthen through that. So,
as a father, can you imagine how proud he is? Because I can't imagine, Jay, to get the phone call that one of your kids has been in a helicopter crash. And one of your kids has been told they're never going to walk again. And one of your kids is in a wheelchair for 4.5 or 5 years. And one of your kids has had their life totally upended. I can't imagine the joy, the emotion, the outburst. Did you see a totally different side of the old man?
I did. He's a man of few words, but if he does let out a little bit, you know that it's pretty special. I think there was a tough descent one night. I think day 3, it was only a 7-kilometre walk, but it was 800 metres of elevation gain. Obviously, that was a tough day, but the next day was the exact opposite. It was like 7 Ks, but it was 800-metre descent. It's actually slower for me to descend because you're walking with the sticks out in front. Like I said, they can fall, they can slip. I think to walk 3 Ks, it took about 6 hours of getting down. We finished in the middle of the night. It was about a 13-hour day, real slow. And I think he made a comment. He's just like, oh, you've got guts, son. That's a nice comment from Dad. He's like, you've got guts, son.
So from your tough Kiwi dad, who was of that era that, you disciplined, didn't know how to show love and emotion. And I can just see you're at ease with it now. So I can see you've processed that as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So only a few words, but it meant a lot.
Absolutely. I can remember it word for word. He's like, oh, you got guts, son. I was like, oh, geez, Dad, that one's a good one. So, yeah, like I said, it was a really, really great trip. Yeah, special time.
You know, it's when you quote your dad, you go to a bit of a Kiwi accent without you got guts, son. Hey?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Natural progression, the base camp. How many days did it take you?
So it took 13. So it was actually the same time as the normal tour groups. I think they may have beat me by 1 day, but some of the big 11-kilometre days that they would do, I'd split into 2. So they'd walk 11 kilometres, they'd stay at that town the next day and do an acclimatisation hike. They'd go up high for a couple of hours and they'd come straight back down. So I'd do 6 and 6. So I'd do 6Ks on one day and 6Ks the next. So I'd kind of catch up every second day. Yeah, so it ended up being 13 days, which is kind of...
So you're a stats man, you're a numbers guy. 13 days. Yeah. Give us the total kilometres and give us the elevation.
So 65 Ks, 2,800 metres of vertical climbing elevation, up to 5364 at Everest Base Camp.
Where there's
5,364 metres.
Bugger all oxygen.
Yeah, she's pretty lean up there.
13 days, 65 kilometres, 2,800 metres, getting the glutes and the hip flexors to coordinate. What an achievement. This is a huge achievement. I know a few people who've done base camp. I actually know a few people who haven't. Like, I know millions who haven't, but a few who've attempted it and they couldn't adapt. The acclimatisation gets a lot of people, doesn't it? It's not the fittest. Like, you look at some of the Sherpas, they're quite emaciated almost, but their bodies have adapted to low oxygen. So when you got there, what happened? How did you feel? Were you high-fiving? Did you just want to sleep? Take us to that moment.
Yeah, so base camp, that was probably one of the toughest days. So the town before base camp's called Gorakshep, freezing cold. Obviously, we had to start early, obviously, because I'm quite slow. So it was only 3 kilometres, but that 3 kilometres, it took me 8 hours. Because from Gorakshep to base camp, you're walking pretty much along a ridge line and then you're on the glacier and it's all over boulders. So me walking over boulders with crutches and sticks, really slow. So I think we left at about 5:30 or 6 in the morning, and it's negative 15, negative 20 in the morning. So really fresh, and a long 8 hours of trekking to get there that day. Like I said, in a weird way, I'm big on visualization, and I'd visualized it so many times before. So when I kind of got there, it was like it was already done in my head. So it was kind of, like I said, I'm quite neutral. I wouldn't say I wasn't jumping up and down. I was just like, kind of internalize it a little bit, and you're just like, yep, you got it done. Like, it's just that nod to yourself. I think also because I knew I had to walk eight hours back for another 3Ks. But like I said, just to look around in that valley when you're right there, you've got Everest on the right-hand side. The other, it's kind of like an amphitheatre. You kind of ride in. Just something that you'd visualise for so many years. You're sitting in a wheelchair 6 years before and thinking that your whole life had been turned upside down and you may have been confined to that thing for the rest of your life. And to be standing there, it was, very, very special.
Interesting, the research on visualization or imagery is the bigger umbrella, multi-sensory. But with visualization, the brain doesn't know the difference between the imagined and the real. So when you've closed your eyes, and most imagery, we tell people to close their eyes because when you shut down the eyes, you don't have the external senses distracting you. So I get this with a lot of athletes, and they'll do the reps and sets mentally, and then when they do it on a game, I'll sometimes see them after a game, they go, amazing, mate, and they felt it was effortless.
Yes.
Felt like the field was bigger and they had more time. So you front-loading mental skills. You've mentioned the word front-load a few times today, which I like. That's exactly how it sounds like you felt, that you'd done the reps and sets, you pictured yourself, you'd felt yourself. Did you use multi-faculty? Was it taste, touch, smell as well, or was it more just vision?
Probably vision and touch, because I was specific with how I visualised the trek. Some of the hard days, I didn't look at too much of it because I didn't want to know all that, because I knew it would be about problem solving in the moment. But on the key metrics like that day was one that I'd really watch. I'd look at the surroundings. I'd actually picture, there's a glacier that you actually walk up, which I'll give you the photo of. I'd actually picture myself like walking up that. Even I'd watch people, obviously with the GoPros on their heads. So you had the visual of them walking to base camp. And they were key ones that I'd be watching with my head pretty close up to the laptop screen. And of course, just any sort of kind of kinesthetic feel. I was always thinking about what the rocks would feel like under my feet. I've always been quite kinesthetic with feel, and especially with my feet and stuff like that. So I was certainly picturing walking over those boulders and the shale kind of rocks. So, yeah, really sensory with that.
Well, your 800-metre running buddy, who I raced against a few times as well, Dave Byrne,
Yep.
he moved to a lot more than 800, didn't he, Dave?
He certainly did. He added a few zeros on the end of the kilometres.
I see him especially on Facebook posts going, I've just done a 100-kilometre run. Like, what? Like 100 kilometres, crazy what he did. You invited him to go to Everest with you.
Yes, he was pretty much one of my main guides. He's obviously got a lot of contacts in the area with the local Sherpas. So we used a company over there, Take on Nepal, and they were just superb. They'd organised it from start to finish. And it was really good to have, obviously, Dave, my father, and Dave's friend, Madge Backhausen, who's also an ultra runner. So it was a perfect little small team. And put it this way, they weren't yelling words of encouragement. It was probably more the other way around. It was more banter.
Well, good to do that with a couple of
that's what I mean. I prefer
mates.
it that way. So, yeah,
well, we've got a bit of the audio and a bit of the footage from that as well. So we'll splice that in so people can get a feel of what it was like.
Maybe just where your foot is, mate, where your foot was.
Thank you. Then ऐसे यदि के गरी हेलिकप्टर फिनिश मैम सबभन्दा अगाडि भिडियो फोटो चाहिँ फोटो भिडियोमा
So to train for this, rewind, back the truck up a bit. What crazy harebrained person idea culminated in going, hey, I'm going to climb over 13 days, 65 kilometres and almost 3,000 metres of elevation?
So I think it was June 2021 that I got my AFO braces. They're the braces that go in my shoe and come up to my knee. For the first 6 months, that was, like I said, walking with a walker. I'd have to sit down every 15 metres. So when I first started, I could walk 200 metres. And by the end of that 6 months, I was finally able to walk a kilometre. So at the start of January 2022. And by June of 2022, I was able to get out 10 kilometres around Narrabeen Lake. And it was after getting that 10 kilometres out and then just doing a few walks up to Palm Beach Lighthouse and just ones with a little bit more tricky terrain, I started really thinking, I said, I could be a red hot go at this. It was always in my mind. And then I think at the start of January of 2023, I said, righto, let's lock this in. But the tricky part was I hadn't learned how to climb upstairs yet. So I'd locked in this trip in January, but I still hadn't even learned how to walk up steps. So in the space of the 6 months, or obviously the 12 months, but there was a big period from about March of 2023 to June, July of 2023, I had to learn how to walk up steps. Of course, I can't neurologically coordinate my legs to go up nice and easy. I have to swing them out because essentially my legs are straight. I have to swing them out to the side and then I have to push up through my crutches like you're doing a dip. I have to get my crutches up onto the step and then I need to push up through my shoulders. So it was about, number one, learning the technique and getting it up the steps, but then it was about efficiency and economy, obviously middle distance. Biomechanics mindset, I'm like, I need to be efficient at this. So it was about doing reps and reps. So obviously I'd head out for about 5 hours on a little circle loop at Parramatta Headland at North Narrabeen. And there was a little trail around there that I'd be able to go around in circles in and just really work on the efficiency, getting up and down those steps for hours and hours.
But there's a process when you were rehabbing. There's a process when you learn to walk. There's a process you're talking about. Are you familiar with that? Have you actually mapped out there's a 3 or a 4 step process, or is that just naturally how you look at something?
I think it's probably, I definitely don't map it all out, but I'm very systems based. Anything I do, I'm all about efficiency, especially with the hiking. Obviously, it was efficiency of my legs first, and then with the steps, it was efficiency through the whole body because it was upper body dips, and it was also lower body pushing through my quads as well. So I'm very, very big on efficiency and cutting down on any energy loss and expended energy off the
I reckon we could reverse engineer and find a framework for what I'm about to tell you. But here's what my take on it is. You first research and learn. What is it? Where is it? What's it look like? You then implement. So you start with 1 kilometre, then you move up to 10 kilometres. I've got to come back to Narrabeen Lake because there's something about that and your mana. And we talk about whakapapa, some of the beautiful Kiwi words I want to drill into. Then you get feedback and then you adapt. So that's how I hear you do it. You research, you implement, you get immediate feedback and you adapt. Does that sound about right?
Certainly sounds about right.
What a beautiful process.
Repeat.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you realise you did that?
No, when it's broken down that way, no. But I'm always evaluating. I'm always looking to get better, those one percenters. And I think it's probably pretty typical of the rehab journey that I've been on.
I think that's a really good teaching tool. I want to see you on stage talking about, hey, here's the 4-step process I do to anything. I'll give you a little wink. Good 4-step process. Narrabeen Lake, it's obviously got some spiritual connection. Are you religious? Are you spiritual? Where do you sit on that?
Yeah, spiritual, like anything with water, anything with being part Maori, anything around the water. And obviously my son's name is Kai, obviously Hawaiian for water. And I have Tane, it's Maori for food. So there's my 2 loves right there. But I used to run around Narrabeen Lake with him every morning. So I had a little Ironman running pram and I'd run around every morning before work with him. So it was a pretty special, if I wasn't surfing, I'd be running around Narrabeen Lake. So I had the best of both worlds. I had running and I had surfing. Obviously, it was a pretty special place for me. So to be able to get back around there again, that was always in the crosshairs. As soon as I was up, I said, Narrabeen Lake's the goal.
How did it feel that first time you walked around Narrabeen Lake?
Yeah, pretty special. It was hard work. I think it was 5 hours and 30 moving, but with rests, I think it was probably up around the 8.5 hour mark. So there was some long days out in the office. I had one of my good friends come around with me. In a weird way, I'd already seen it in my head. So I'm quite neutral when it comes to achievements because I've had to rehearse them so many times in my head. It's like it's already been done. I don't know if it's a positive or a negative thing, but I'm always looking for the next thing. I'm quite neutral when it comes to anything involved with sport and achievements and stuff. So I've always found...
pause though? There's a coaching psychology term that I use a fair bit on this podcast called lag time. And interesting, earlier this week, Ange, who I run performance intelligence with, we had a client that is going to be using our digital platform and they want to use it for their clients. So it's exciting. But this guy said, can you also show us the evolution? I was like, interesting. He said, I want to know where have you come to get to where you are? We're phase 2 in a 4-phase tech build. And what was really interesting, Jay, is looking at phase 1, going back to when we first presented this 3 or 4 years ago. It was shitty. Like the graphics I had designed for this app, freaking horrible. But at that time, we're peddling because you sell what you've got. But what was really interesting, I'll get to the point, is putting this presentation together earlier this week. Ange and I both went, God, we're so proud of where we've come from. If we'd known it was this much work, this many setbacks, this much money, building a technology business, mate, it's like having a bath with a plug that doesn't fit and the water's running 100% of the time. But I'm so proud of where we are. And we both acknowledged after we did this meeting that going back and looking at phase 1 was really powerful. And I teach this. I need to do it more. Do you do that or do you just go to the next thing? Like lag time is actually sitting, reflecting, looking in the mirror, can help to journal or play it back. So some sort of self-reflection. It's not just journaling. It can be talking or even voice recording. Do you do that?
It's very interesting you brought that up because since I've been dealing with the grief from the last 6 years, it's actually allowed me to reflect because it was always just forward motion, perpetual forward motion. And now that obviously retrospectively looking back at that grief, that's kind of actually allowed me to open up and look back at some of those times. Funnily enough, I think it was about 3 or 4 days ago, I actually went back through my diary on my phone and I think it was the start of end of 2018, end of the year of the accident. My second son was born in December of that year. So it was a bit of a miracle baby. Obviously I had him after the accident, IVF baby. I'd still written back then, just before I had him, it was the 5th of December 2018, and I think the diary entry was the 3rd, and it was around, obviously, still a bit of a tough time, but to have come through the last 12 months and to be finishing it off with another little boy along the way, what a blessing to sit there. And I wrote at the end of that, I said, I cannot wait till he gets older to obviously be walking with him. And being able to reflect back on that was pretty powerful, because that was something I never would have done before. I never would have gone back into the diary and looked at areas where you've had to be strong, and doing some of the EMDR when I said going back into that grief, because like I said, I came back home from the spinal cord hospital. I'd have to be up at 4:30 in the morning. I'd drive down to Sutherland. You're all by yourself. You got no one to talk to. Your whole life is a mess. It's a hot mess. Everything's been turned upside down. Just to be able to go back into those memories and just so you fucking did it. You did it. Like, even you had that, it's that irrational self-belief. Like, it really is irrational. Like, it has to just be so deeply embedded, and you just have to believe it. Even times when you don't think it's going to happen, you just have to say it's going to happen, and you keep repeating it and you keep repeating it. So being able to go back into that grief quite reflectively now, I can sit back, and when you do the EMDR, it's like you're sitting next to yourself. When I was driving the car by myself, just heartbroken, your whole life was turned upside down, and it's kind of like you're patting yourself on the back. You're saying, like, you fucking did it. You said what you were going to do, and you did it.
I've dropped the F-bomb multiple times. You've only done it twice. It's when you're talking about this, I can see the passion. I can feel the passion. If I shift out of having a conversation, if I was coaching you now, I'd say, mate, do it regularly. And because you're a systems guy, I'd give you a time. I'd say every 2 weeks to 4 weeks, sit down, grab a pen, or message your buddy that you were messaging at 4:30 a.m. You're still messaging him? Have you got that
I messaged him this morning. I couldn't sleep last night with nerve pain. He messaged me. His name's Tim Wynn.
Tim Wynn. We'll give a big shout out to Tim Wynn.
Yeah, big shout out to Tim Wynn, son of Peter Wynn.
Good name, Tim Wynn, isn't
yes.
it? So you could text a message to Tim. No, I've seen this with some of my athletes, mate, that writing for them, they feel it's just a bit disconnected writing, and they don't really get the emotion. So some of them just do an audio message. Yeah. Hey, Maisie, did this at training today, or hey, this came up in my relationship, because how you show up at home is how you show up in the ring, on the mat, in the velodrome. So they'll play that back. It's just that process of playing back. So to big Tim Win, or just a journal, to every 2 to 4 weeks. So next time I catch up with you, the first question I'm going to say is, how is the regular self-reflection going? Okay. And I really think that'll help to get that next level of evolution. But more so, I just want you to sit back and periodically go, I've fucking done this. Because this is the only time today I've actually seen you pause from we're still going to go to next achievement, next, and actually go, oh, I'm doing good. Yeah? Because I listened to your story and doing the research. It's so much bigger than what I've read. It's so much richer. It's so much more new. It's a bloody big story.
Deep, like I said, there's a bit of depth in there. Like this mind, it never stops.
So when I say that, how do you feel? I can sort of see you take a bit of a breath and reflect. Does it feel nice to sit in it and catch up with it?
It does. And I think especially over the last few months, I think there's a bit of a softer side is starting to come out. It's starting to accept it all, speaking in front of people and that now, and obviously seeing the effect that it has on them. But it's also quite therapeutic as well. And definitely, I think the key that's unlocked it has been working with that grief. Like I said, that was the biggest one that I'd pushed down so much. Just recounting some of the memories that I'd said before, just like, you've done it. You really did what you said you could do. You're absolutely about what you say you're about. And, you're walking the talk. I think that's the thing. It's just a belief in self and knowing that it's come to fruition. It's a nice feeling. Yeah, it's content. I think that's probably the big thing, contentness.
I reckon you would make people uncomfortable and feel lazy when you speak, when you coach, when you teach. Do you get those comments that people come up and go, geez, bro, I need to lift my game?
It comes out sometimes. Some people are like, oh, at least you got me up.
Like, we can play, it's cold this morning, it's in the middle of winter, or it's hot, I couldn't exercise, or my knees a bit like, princess, go on.
Yeah, there is a bit of that, but like I said, if it can get some people more out and open, that's it's done its job. I can't turn it off, so, it's never going away.
There's a real balance when you listen to this. There's the real juxtaposition, and I love that with you. It's almost the yin and the yang, and I'm pulling you back sometimes to the yin because the yang's overriding. So I just got you to sit in the yin.
Yeah,
there'll be some beautiful words. There'll be some Maori words around this. So you can do the research and play back to me. What is a Maori word which is about sitting? And I know whakapapa. Not that word, but whakapapa is the light is shining on you now.
Yeah.
And this is your beautiful time to shine it on others, because if your dad and his ancestors, and this is rich for you, right? And setting it up for your boys. But can you find out what's a Maori word for me? Because I'd love to play this back to some of my Pacifica players as well.
Yeah.
Just on being in the present, just chilling in the vibe.
It's interesting. I think the big thing for me pre-accident with that was surfing. Obviously, I don't surf as much, but I got back into surfing obviously at the start of this year because everything was walking. I actually got back into surfing at the start of this year, ended up going up and doing a competition up at Byron Bay. They've started a World Adaptive Surf Tour for obviously people with disabilities. Yeah, it was nice to go back up and, like I said, to surf Byron Bay by yourself. That was the main reason why. There was a good swell. And
hey, babe, hey, kids, I've got to be away. Daddy's away for 10 days for surfing.
They got in on that one. So they got in on that trip. But as it comes to being present, it was always surfing. That was the big piece for me. That was obviously got me a lot more present and stuff. So now that I've pretty much reintroduced that again, I think, there's definitely a lot more of that kind of relaxation and probably time for reflection.
Yeah, I'm a hopeless surfer. Oh no, I'm have not reached my surfing peak yet.
I like the yet part.
Would say I can stand up, and if I go across a wave, I think I'm like Kelly Slater. Like I think I've done this re-entry. I'm floating, and then I look at it in video and go, who's the guy that shiny-headed guy that looks so fucking rigid on the surfboard? I love sitting out the back, just in between sets, and it's peaceful. There's no mobile phone. There's no Bluetooth coming up. It's just being present, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, definitely the oceans. It was always that for me. That was the calm place. But it was also good when the waves got good then, because then you could obviously push the envelope as well. I like that part as well.
Two questions on surfing. Are you going to get into the surfing on a bigger scale and compete?
Yeah, I think they've set up that world tour now. So you've got Byron Bay, Costa Rica, Hawaii, and then California. Certainly a nice little tour to get around. I ended up coming third in the one up at Byron Bay, which was pretty cool. Yeah, it's definitely something I can definitely see myself getting into. It's an interesting one, but I've always loved that. I think there's just that bit more of that challenge with the walking. So like I said, it's that yin and yang. You've got that dark side with the walking and the energy, but then I guess you've got the softer side with the surfing. So
that really relates for you, doesn't it, the yin and the yang?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Second question on surfing. Do you know a mate of mine called Matt Formston?
Yes, I see his movies just come out a few weeks ago too.
Freaking awesome.
Yeah, so, my friend said he saw it. I'll pretty much go and watch it. So.
Matt was on a previous podcast. We'll put in the show notes the episode that it was, but he's just done toe-in surfing. So the first person legally blind to toe in a 50-foot open-faced wave at Nazaré.
Yeah.
So do you actually know Matt personally?
I don't know him personally. I think he may have been at the comp at Byron Bay. I'm not too sure. But yeah, of course, I know who he is, and I know what he's about.
I want to connect you both.
Yeah.
Your story is one of inspiration, of the doctors telling you what wasn't going to happen, you going the opposite, reinventing. There's science and there's a lot of intuition. I think you would have some scientists scratching their heads going, what have you done? Matt's similar. I want to connect you guys.
Yeah.
I think you'll have a beautiful conversation. He's crazy. I love him, but he's crazy. He's left of centre. I see a lot of similarities. It's probably dangerous that I introduce you two guys, but I think it needs to happen.
Yeah, surf trip can be fine too.
Who's your favourite NRL team?
I grew up out at Castle Hill, so it's always been Parramatta. I grew up out that way.
I'm sorry to hear that. At the moment,
Yep.
They're struggling, the Eels, aren't they? But you live on Northern Beaches now?
Yes, Northern Beaches.
When did you go to your last Manly Sea Eagles game?
Ooh, we went probably about 7 weeks ago. My little one played at half-time. So it was Manly versus St. George. And
Manly
my little
won
one,
that game?
Yes, they came back, came home
in
strong.
the second half, yes.
And, my little one plays for Narrabeen Sharks, so he was on at half-time. So, yeah, great little game.
Matt is a fervent Manly Sea Eagles supporter, so let's look at a game. I'll invite both of you, come to a game.
Yeah.
I think that'll be a nice natural way to
Yeah,
connect.
perfect. Sounds great.
Jay, let's discuss what you're doing now behind the scenes, putting together a couple of new products, specifically speaking, exploring this topic of the dark side. I love, even the working title, Embrace the Dark Side, or how tapping into the dark side gives you a superpower. I think people would read that, bureaus and companies would read that and go, ooh, and then what does that actually mean? So how would you articulate that? What is tapping into the dark side?
Yeah, like I said, for me personally, it's a bit of now for me, I'd say it's like aggressive patience. Like it's an aggression. It's a wild, untamed kind of energy. But the position that I find myself in now, obviously I can't let it out, go willy-nilly, go and play a game of footy and take a million hit-ups. It's aggressive, strategic patience now. So, like I said, I'm quite strategic with all my rehab, but also even with my speaking. Like I said, I'm still I can't turn off the competitive instincts. I listened to Michael McQueen the other week, listen to what they do.
How good's MJ?
Amazing.
Biggest learning you had from him?
Oh, just reps. And
practice. But where he talks about he did that 5 or 10 minute speaker slot.
Couple, like 100 hours or something.
100 plus hours, yeah.
And I recently did a keynote speaking course with Vin Jiang. And
how was that?
Really good. Stage
I
Academy.
Saw Vin, gosh, it's been 15 years ago, maybe more. He and I were both starting. He was doing more magic tricks back then. Seeing where he was then, he saw this raw talent, but flipping around a bit to where he is now. He's a freaking rock star.
Amazing, yeah. So I only did that recently. It was in June. It was called the Stage Academy, and just seeing it was very similar. Just reps, and like I said, just the subtle nuances of practicing vocal archetypes, pausing, tonality, body language. That's probably been a big one for myself. Is really, like I said, I can't turn it off. So I sit there at home practicing in the mirror because my body language is a lot different now. I can't stand there and use my hands the way I normally would, obviously because I have crutches. So I actually lower them to different heights, so then it allows me to get my hands up high and low. So like I said,
did Vin help with all that?
Yeah. So it was really good. He was doing live coaching at the course, and absolutely, yeah, he certainly was.
I have to get his details off you. I'd love to get him on the podcast. I'd love to reconnect. So if you're okay, I'll get that off you and I'll get him on here. I just love his message. Yeah,
no, he's really, really good. Very similar, a lot of similarities with Michael I could see with that. So
aggressive patience. I love the oxymoron.
Yeah, it was a hard one to learn. Like I said, I had to learn that one the hard way because, like I said, I had the moments before where you let it out. So when you're surfing big waves, you could switch and dial it on. And, sometimes when you're surfing, if you've got all that energy, you're paddling for the wrong waves. It's just like some people getting over arousal curve when they're playing a footy game and ready to take a hit up and they knock it on. I certainly had a bit of that. But one of the big things I have learnt from being with the spinal cord injury and learning patience, it's picking your spots and just consistency and that aggressive patience day after day.
So if I look at the crystal ball with you, 5 years is a long time. Let's go 3. What does a great day, great week look like for you?
Great day, great week would be taking my kids to school and picking them up. And, of course, if we can get in between that, I'll get in a walk. And I'd love to be keynote speaking out on a national tour around Australia, NZ, and possibly over in the States.
So for people listening to this, because there's a big audience, corporate audience that listens to this, Jay, that want to book you or want to get you in for some inspo, could be their executive team, could be a sales team, could be a sporting team. How do we find you?
So I've got a website and it is jstephenskeynote.org. So all one word, jstephenskeynote.org.
So it's J-A-Y, Stephens, S-T-E-V-E-N-S. And if you don't know how to spell keynote, Google it.
.org.
Let's finish with the flip. Is there a question in preparation for today you thought I'd ask that I haven't? Or is there a question you want to ask me, the flip?
What's the biggest challenge you find communicating and bridging your message to younger generations, what like the X, Y, Z now, if you've got a message like this, and how do you make it land tighter, more meaningful, more impactful to younger generations that are a little bit more distracted and have got a lot more things competing for their attention?
Jeez, can I re-ask that? Can I just ask you a question? Well, let me answer that in 2 levels. Because it's two different parts to the question. The first is, what do I do to get my message to land? Reps and sets and practice. So I like the notion of cross-training. I'm putting out a book next year called Inside Job. So I've been doing mental skills in sport now for 4 years, officially, but I've been doing mental skills in my corporate life and sporting life for 25 to 30 years. So I do the reps and sets. So before I teach an athlete or I teach an audience, I've written about it. I'll then talk about some concepts on TV, or I'll do it in a podcast, or I'll do it in a radio interview. Writing really gets me clarity. I find when I write, I have to cut out all the periphery, all the long words, and just get to the crux of it. So if there was a process, because I gave you your process, actually let's run it through your process. I'll see whether this stacks up. First of all, research and learn, then implement, then get feedback and adapt. It's exactly what I do without even realizing it. So I'll look at what is the message. Let me pick one we spoke about before around imagery. So imagery is one of the 12 essential mental skills. So we know the research on imagery is the brain doesn't know the difference between the imagined and the real. We know imagery, there's 5. It's sight, taste, touch, feel and smell. But you speak to Matt Formston, your soon-to-be BFF on the surfboard, is there's a 6th sense. So I'll do all those reps and sets and practice. So then when you're asked, you can actually give a really clear, crisp, concise message. And then if someone asks a question, you go deeper.
Gotcha.
Not dissimilar to Michael McQueen, but when you hear the articulation and crispness, and Michael's, I think he's one of the best that does this. He makes it look so easy because he's done the work. Yeah. So I do a lot more work behind the scenes than I let on to people.
Yep.
So then when you get up and teach or speak or coach, you can make it in a soundbite.
Yes.
Second part of your question, how would I make that resonate with a young audience? Yeah, it's hard, because I can. The sweet spot for me would be late 20s, early 30s, if they want to perform, right through to older and generations above mine. I think about Glenn Capelli, who's an amazing presenter, coach, speaker that I learned a lot from many years ago. I was only thinking about this swimming this morning, so it's interesting you asked this question. Glenn talks about with your message, you should be able to articulate it for a 7-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 70-year-old. So how would I articulate a message on performance? So one of the areas that we're working on as well is mental skills for school. So I'll give you a real example. So with school kids, what do they want to do? They want to pass the HSC. And if I start talking about elite athletes and who I work with, unless it's an athlete, a male or female, and they really connect with it, might have a really brainy kid, they're like, well, mate, I'm a brainiac. I don't do sport. How do I make it relevant for them? So I'd break it right down. I wouldn't use any excess words, and I just make it real for that person. So as an example, if we were talking again about a mental skill for a 16 or 17-year-old, if I'm talking to a boy, we're doing some work with a couple of male-only schools, we'll talk about stress recovery balance. And I have some of them look at me like, fuck, who are you, old guy? So why do you need stress recovery balance? It's going to help you in exams. Who wants to go dating? And this is a story I used recently with a sporting group. Who would like to be better at dating? Every one of their hands went up. Well, if you can regulate stress and recovery better, you're not going to say stupid shit when you're on a first date. Oh, and then the questions flowed. Yeah. So I just really break it down. What's the skill? And then how do you teach it for that age group?
Hook them in.
Yeah. Good question.
Yeah, awesome. Love it.
Good question. We could talk for a long, long time.
Yeah.
My goal in doing this was twofold. One was I wanted to get you in here to really look at the message, and we spoke about to tell the story, to share the story, and it's a great one. Have you got a book in you yet?
I just think there's still more to come. I'm obviously training up for a 24-hour, 50-kilometre walk in October, and then I think I've got my eyes set on some vertical kilometre races as well. Obviously, they're only about 4 or 5 Ks, but you're gaining a kilometre of elevation as well. So
on that lag time, do you reckon you need to do that to get a book out there, or is this part of that forward achievement as well? Is the yang outweighing the yin on this?
Oh, I think absolutely there, yes. A few people have asked, about a book. So, yeah, it's definitely something that's certainly popping up a lot more and more and more.
When it's ready, sit on it, think about it. When it's ready, you can't push it, but I just think your story, the helicopter crash is it's the backdrop to the story. It's how you've overcome it. It's the neuroscience. It's the physicality. It's the dark side. I love that. Second part is I wanted people to listen to your message, and my goal is that some people reach out and book you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me on.
I've loved today. You've moved me. And I've got no doubt you're going to move many, many more people in Australia, in New Zealand, and in America in the years to come.
I like the sound of that. Thank you very much, Andrew. Thanks for having me on.
Pleasure, mate.
Cheers.